So I want to first talk about the supply side of the equation. We all know that production costs are dramatically lower now than they've ever been because of new technologies. Everybody in the world is walking around with a high-definition camera in their back pocket, otherwise known as a smartphone, so that everybody in the world thinks they're a filmmaker at this point. But it does mean that there are lots of movies being made. It's all the more reason, by the way, why you should all be congratulated for having gotten into the Toronto Film Festival, because I can't imagine how many films they look at in order to select the ones that they're actually going to put in the festival. But there's a couple of statistics there that are a little bit frightening. The statistic from Without a Box, which is from 2010, I haven't been able to find a more recent statistic than this, but one can only assume that it's gone up. But this is 45,000 unique titles, feature films, 45,000 feature films submitted to film festivals in the year 2010. And then the second thing, which I guess relates a little bit more to you short filmmakers out there, more than 100 hours of video uploaded to YouTube every minute. So you realize that we're in a time of plenty in terms of the actual supply of films into the marketplace. Let's talk about the studios for a second. The studios have reduced production dramatically to focus on what they call their tentpole movies, the big summer action films. That's really all they're interested in at this stage of the game. And this is just a couple of statistics that kind of pointed out there were only 101 films released in 2012 by the major studios altogether. Warner's is the one outlier. For some reason, they produce more than any of the other studios. They made 24 films, or released 24 films. But the average is 15.4 for all the other studios. So you can see that if your aspirations go in a studio direction, this is a very rarefied place at the moment. The studios have also left the quote-unquote classics business. There's only 3 studio classics divisions left: Fox Searchlight, Focus, which is part of Universal, and Sony Classics. Without going into a whole lot of detail about each of the 3, they're all a little bit different in terms of the way that they do business. They're all looking for films that can cross over to a relatively broad audience. And a lot of what they do is actually it's driven by foreign values, where they make movies and they buy movies based on what they think they can get in terms of value overseas, and then the US market becomes kind of like their bonus. They're in a great position to do that because foreign buyers, for those of you who don't know this, if they're going to be interested in a feature film that's an English language film from one of the major English language territories in the world, they want to know that it has major distribution, at the very least in its home country, in order to certify that it's of some value whatsoever. And so Focus, Searchlight, and Sony Classics are in a great position because they can guarantee a certain level of distribution in the US, and therefore can cash it in by selling it overseas based on the fact that it's going to get a decent release in the United States. Now let's flip to the demand side. There's this major disruption that has gone on in just about every business in the world called the internet. And it's slowly affecting, well, right now it's quickly affecting the film world. It's gone through the music world, the book world, the magazine world, the newspaper world, the encyclopedia world. We can go on and on and on about all the various businesses that have been disrupted and in some cases destroyed by the internet. But I want to talk for a minute about the long tail theory. Anybody in here know what I'm talking about? Anybody? Okay, we got one hand. All right. The long tail theory is based on this idea of what's called the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule is that in any retail business, what they've discovered over and over and over again is that 80% of your business is done by 20% of your product. So that's the reason why when you go into a Walmart or a big place that theoretically you'd say, well, Walmart's really big. Why don't they stock 1 million titles of DVDs? Well, the answer is they've discovered they don't have to stock all that stuff that does no business whatsoever. They want to stock only the hot titles that they know are going to do business. So if you assume that 80% of your business is going to be done by 20% of your product, you only stock that 20% of your product. And it's a very efficient way of doing business, particularly in a real retail business where you have to manage inventory. So that could be the DVD business, but it could also be theaters. You only have a certain number of screens, so you're going to play. If you're a big chain of theaters like Cineplex Odeon, it doesn't matter how many screens you've got, the likelihood is you're going to be putting all of your screens on the 20% of the product that's going to do all the business, okay? So now that the internet has appeared, suddenly there's no more brick and mortar, there's no more inventory control. If you're Amazon, just to pick an example, it means that you can have one warehouse where as long as you have one copy of a film in your warehouse, if somebody orders it, it's there. You don't have to worry about having, if you have 600 Walmart stores, you've got to have at least 600 copies of that DVD in order to have one in each store, which is kind of a useless exercise because your inventory is going to be in all the wrong places. So what happens is the minute that you're talking about internet sales, all of this stuff with the 80-20 rule goes away. So there's no more restraints based on inventory control, meaning you can stock everything. If you're Amazon, if you're Netflix, if you know, whatever. So what does that mean? Here is what the long tail looks like, which is that the 80-20 rule applies at the head, which is to say that you know, basically the majority of the business is still going to be done by that 20% of the product that everybody's interested in. But this long tail means that if you have a film where there's only 5 people in the world that are interested in it, it means that Amazon or Netflix can still stock that film because that actually adds up to a very large business for them. And here's the thing, is that when the long tail theory was first propagated, and it was done, I'm forgetting his name now, but the guy who did it is the editor of Wired magazine. Anderson. Yes, thank you. You know, basically, independent filmmakers all over the world started cheering because it was like, yeah, there's a market for our films, this is great. Now all of a sudden we don't have to worry about being in Walmart, we can be on Amazon or Netflix or whatever. But the problem with this long tail theory is that, in fact, it's a really good business for Amazon and for Netflix. But for you, it actually might be pennies. Because if you're only selling 5 copies of your movie, they're selling 5 copies of millions of movies, so it adds up. But you're still only selling 5 copies of your movie. So while these distribution mechanisms are positive because you can get your films out there, what this really comes back to is that the idea of getting the audience interested in it and actually selling units of whatever it is you're selling is up to you, because they're not going to do the work for you. So now we get to festivals. What is a film festival for? There's a number of different things that can be accomplished at a film festival. The first one, and this relates to a lot of the people here, is buying and selling the distribution rights. Now, in order for a festival to be capable of buying and being a market for this kind of thing, the first question is, do the buyers and sellers actually attend? And there's only a small number of festivals in the world where that's true. And this happens to be one of them. But in fact, if it's not Cannes or Berlin or Toronto or for American independence, Sundance, there's not a whole lot of festivals in the world that actually do have active, vibrant markets attached to them. Now, let me explain the difference between a festival and a market. It's actually a key thing that a lot of people misunderstand. A festival is a public event. Real people attend, real audiences, not just industry, and the press attend because it's a public thing. They cover it as if it's a public event because it is. So it means that there is context that accrues to the benefit of the films that show there. Because after all, if you have a movie that, you know, there's no built-in market for it, there's no big stars, nobody's ever heard of the director before, the genre is not something that automatically sells, all that kind of stuff, then how do you get attention for a movie like that? How do you prove to a distributor or to you know, an online outlet or to a TV network that your film is going to draw an audience? Well, the only weapons you have available to you if you don't have all the built-in things that create a commercial movie are audience and press. So word of mouth from the audience and/or press attention from the movie. Those are the only two weapons you've got. You've only got those weapons at a festival. Because film markets, and there's like the American film market in Los Angeles, there's other strict markets, meaning there's no festival attached to them. In a market, you're talking about a private event, buyers and sellers, no press, no audience. So the kinds of films that sell in a market are the obvious ones. This person's in it, you know, it's in focus and it's got this much violence in it and it's, you know, whatever. But people are sizing it up from a pure marketplace point of view, and it has nothing to do with the quality. There's no way to prove that you've got a film that's going to break through all the barriers in the marketplace. So, okay, aside from buying and selling distribution rights, the next possibility in terms of what you would use a festival for is launching a film into the marketplace. This is, as the marketplace shrinks in the way that I was talking about, you know, in terms of at least the theatrical market, more and more people are looking at festivals from this perspective, which is, this is a way of getting it, using the festival in lieu of a theatrical release, meaning that this is the moment that you're actually going to try to get attention for your movie and launch it into the marketplace, whatever that might be. And by the way, the studios do that. They come to festivals like this, and they do, you know, junkets and, you know, whatever. And basically, they're using the festival as a launching platform to put a film into the marketplace. But there's a smaller version of that that any of us can achieve by actually using the platform to get attention. Now, the question about launching a film into release is, do press actually attend that film festival? And I'm going to say again that there's only a small number of film festivals in the world, including this one, where there is actually a lot of press attending. You might be able to get local press if you go to the Cleveland Film Festival, just to, you know, pick one. And maybe you can use it as a way of launching into the Cleveland market so that you're getting attention for it locally, and then maybe you can follow up with some sort of a release there. But the point is, if you're trying to make a splash to the world's press or to a country's press or whatever, you're paying attention to who actually attends that film festival. You're not going to get press who doesn't normally attend. So you're dealing with what you have available to you. The timing of the release becomes a critical factor in this, because if in fact you're launching into the marketplace, the question is, are you opening that Friday? Are you using it as a way of you know, are you going to have it online and available at a certain point? You're thinking out strategically how best to use whatever momentum you're going to create out of that film festival. And then, as I already mentioned, you can be doing this in lieu of a traditional theatrical release. The festival circuit could become your theatrical launch. To launch your ancillary markets. There's a real interesting question here. You won't find this to be true of major film festivals like this, but if you end up on the regional film festival circuit, there's some film festivals around the world that actually will pay film rental, meaning that you can actually make some money off of the film, off of the releases. So it's something to keep in the back of your mind. Okay, so now we're up to TIFF. Keeping in mind all the things that I just laid out for you in terms of ways in which you can use a film festival, buyers and sellers do attend, even though the market is unofficial. Unlike a structured market that, you know, like the American film market or whatever, or like the film market that exists at the Cannes Film Festival side by side with the festival, Toronto doesn't have an official market. But yet, it actually does draw buyers and sellers from all over the world. It's the largest gathering of North American press of any film festival worldwide. I know that sounds amazing, but it's true. I mean, there's no American festival that draws as many North American press as Toronto does. That's the reason why the studios do so many junkets here. And it's something that, again, one can take advantage of. And by the way, don't think about doing a junket. I mean, if you don't have movie stars, the vast majority of the press that are here are not going to be ready to cover your little movie, unless, by the way, you develop enough buzz about the film that it starts to get people's attention. There's wildly enthusiastic audiences here. I'm very fond of telling people that that you can go to an 8:30 in the morning screening of a Vietnamese documentary and somehow the audience is full. People love their movies at the Toronto Film Festival. And I was once quoted in, I think it was Variety, back when the Canadian dollar used to trade not very well against the US dollar, and say that you had to discount the reaction in Toronto by the same amount as the currency. But in reality, now that the currency is exactly the same for the most part as the US dollar, I think you can get rid of that idea altogether. The truth is that you have a great environment for people to see your movie because audiences are so enthusiastic at the festival. And the festival is well organized and easy to navigate, especially since it's moved to this area of downtown Toronto. It's in a relatively compact area where you can get from place to place. There's plenty of facilities set up specifically for filmmakers to hang out, to have a place to interact with other people, lots of events going on, all of the communications really clear, so that it is one of the easier film festivals to navigate. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it's easier than just about every other major film festival that I've ever been to. Okay, so let's assume you're here to sell your movie. This is going to only affect a few of you, but those of you who are here with shorts, you can be thinking about this prospectively for the future. The first thing you need is press attention and buzz of some sort. So, what kind of materials can you create in order to be able to do that? Posters. A lot of people put a lot of emphasis on this. If you don't have the resources to create a poster around your movie, I wouldn't worry that much about it. The truth is that there's not that many locations to be able to put posters around town. They're in the sales office and in several other locations within the film festival proper. There are places where you can put posters up. Certainly, they'll use posters in some of the venues or whatever. But in terms of plastering them all over town, I don't think this has as much of an impact as people think it's going to have, and it's probably a waste of time, energy, money, etc. So think about a short run of something. And by the way, if you can do something that's less than one sheet size, you're probably going to end up getting more exposure for it, because then you could think about things like, going to local stores and seeing if they'll put one in the window or whatever. If you have a big one sheet size poster, there's very, very little use for those because the real estate is just too valuable. There's too many people who are competing for what little real estate is available. Make sure you do have your website up and running. A website is a given for anybody who's creating media these days as at least a central point to get information out. So, I could go on and on about this, and we don't have really time to dig into it too much. But I'm a big believer in making sure that if you have a website for a movie, that you keep it dynamic. Don't make a static website that just has one piece of information on it. Cameron was talking earlier about the use of social media. I'll touch on that, but I could do 2 hours on that subject alone. But the reality is your website is your hub for all of your activity to build audience. So you want to make sure that you have something that's interesting, dynamic, where you're adding to it, where you have something to promote on an ongoing basis. And particularly when you're in a film festival context, being able to use that website as a place where people can see when is it playing, where is it playing, how are people reacting to it, all that kind of stuff. And then the final thing is postcards, which are really cheap and are a great thing to carry around with you at the film festival. And the only thing that I want to say, and I put it in parentheses up there, is make them pocket-sized. People have this tendency to feel like if they make a bigger postcard that somehow it's going to have more of an impact, but it's more likely they'll end up in the garbage because people don't want to carry around a lot of stuff. If it's pocket-sized, they'll just slip it in their pocket, and then they may end up actually hanging on to it. But the postcards you want to have at a film festival are going to have your screening times on it, Because that's how, when you meet somebody at a party, you start talking about your movie, they say, oh, when's it playing? And you can flip out a card and say, here, this is the show times, this is, you know, when it's going to be available. Get your pitch down. You all just did a little rehearsal. You know, you want to be able to make it brief and compelling. You want people to want to see your movie. If you have a good backstory, it's worth practicing that too. Like, you know, there's something about the movie that could potentially become a press angle down the road. You know, I worked on a movie once that was called Straight Outta Brooklyn. I don't know if any of you were familiar with it. It's a long time ago, but this was a movie that was made by an 18-year-old guy from the inner city, guess what, in Brooklyn. And the fact that he was an 18-year-old filmmaker, at that time, that backstory was, in fact, the reason we got attention for the movie. And so you got to be thinking about those things. Being an 18-year-old filmmaker, by the way, is not a press angle anymore. If you had a 4-year-old filmmaker and you actually got into a film festival, that might work. Keep in mind also that there is danger of overhype. I always say that the last thing in the world you want to be is the most anticipated film in the film festival, because those are the films that get the worst reactions. What you want to be is somewhat anticipated. And I know it's hard to navigate that exactly, but you just got to watch your hype. You've got to, you know, I'm a big believer in the fact that the best way to get an audience to love your movie is to set them up the right way. So you got to find language to talk about your movie that sets up the correct expectations for what the film is. Not so easy to do as it is for me to say that. Know your market. Who are the right buyers for your film, and is it really theatrical, which would be, you know, for some of you. You got to be realistic in this marketplace. And one of the things that you got to remember is that you only get a couple of shots at the buyers, and the likelihood is, if you squander, if you have a meeting with somebody or you manage to get somebody's attention during the festival, if you hype them on something as if it's going to be for them, and you actually get them to pay attention and it turns out it's not for them, you've squandered an opportunity. So that I would really study up on the trades, you know, be reading online, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, you know, whatever local trades you've got here. Just be conscious of who the buyers are and what they're looking for, so that you're identifying the right people for your particular project. Be realistic. You know, the distribution appetite, as we've been talking about earlier, is limited. Theatrical's riskier than ever. You got to be open to these new ideas about, you know, ways of putting films into the marketplace. We already went over all of this, but distributors, the big point here is that distributors are more conservative than ever about the kind of risks that they'll be willing to take with theatrical. TV outlets have very specific needs. It's again, something that you can actually do your homework about. Seeing, you know, if you think that your film might be appropriate for a particular network, the best thing to do is watch that network. See what kind of programming they're actually doing. Try to absorb what it is that they're putting up on the screen, because it's usually very, very specific. One of the great things about television is that you can pretty much tell what they want by what they do. Online distribution is still in its infancy. There's plenty of people who are chasing product for various online outlets, and very little money changing hands. You really have to, again, do your homework. You know, for any distribution deal of any sort, any outlet that you might be thinking about doing business with, always ask for references. Ask for the names and phone numbers of a couple of distributors a couple of filmmakers that they've worked with, and find out, did it actually net you anything? Do you feel like it was worthwhile? Did they pay attention to your film? Can you get them on the phone? Try to get some expert advice about likely buyers for your film and the value of your film. Now, expert advice could be anybody in the business who follows things closely. It doesn't have to be some, you know, big mucky muck somewhere. You're basically looking for just inside information about Where does your film fit in the marketplace? And listen to what they have to say. There's a lot of people who have their heads in the clouds about their you know, the value of whatever it is that they've created. You've got to be willing to open your minds to all sorts of situations. And then this is a relatively recent phenomenon, this idea of Plan B, which is that the idea of self-distribution. The great thing about self-distribution is that you're cutting all the middlemen out. So it means that a larger percentage of whatever a film takes in comes directly to you. But the reality is that it's not so easy to crack it from an audience perspective. But I do believe that we're heading into a world in which, because of social media, because all of these outlets are becoming more accessible to people, where there actually is a way of getting attention for something to actually make a reasonable return on it that can ultimately, hopefully pay back your investors, hopefully, you know, put you in a position where you can make your next film, which is ultimately what you want to be able to do. And we already talked about festival distribution instead of theatrical. How to get press attention. If you can afford to hire a publicist, hire a publicist. They know, they have the relationships, they know how to get people interested in a movie. But if not, make friends with the festival publicity department, because they're there to serve you. They're the ones who, you know, I would say just touch base with them at the very least, and make sure that they're aware that you're available. Try to get them to be familiar with your movie enough to be able to talk about it, so that it's in the back of their minds as they talk to journalists, and would potentially be able to bring up your film if somebody's asking them. And the press do this all the time. It's like, what's out there that's worth seeing? Are there any short films that you would highly recommend? You know, any of those things are possible if you're dealing with the festival press people, and treat them nicely. Work on a proper press kit. Proper press kit, you know, in this day and age, it's all done electronically for the most part. You're talking about a PDF of information about your film that you can email to somebody at a moment's notice. You know, have it on your smartphone so that if you're talking to somebody, you can whip it to them if you need to. But basically, it's your cast and credits, information about what the film is about, information about the filmmakers and that backstory that we talked about, stuff that gives context to your particular film. Rehearse your pitch and that backstory. We already talked about that. I would say if you can avoid the first weekend of the film festival, you're probably going to you know, be able to get more press attention, because the press generally here, just being realistic, are really tied up with the studio movies for that first weekend. But then things ease off. So, you know, hopefully at least you have a second screening, you know, somewhere beyond that first weekend, so that you can actually get the press to pay a little bit more attention. You know, I'm going to modify this a tiny bit, which is, you know, have it early screening for the local press, but I'm just going to say make screeners available for the local press. The local press are the ones who set the stage for everybody else, and they, all the local publications, and this is true of a lot of major national publications here and in the US, they have these articles that are called curtain raisers, which are essentially the main article that leads into the film festival, where they highlight certain things that are worth people paying attention to. So if you get your screeners out to these people early, then the likelihood is that that you have a better chance, let's put it that way, of getting into these curtain raiser articles. Talent availability. Talent can be both a plus and a minus at a film festival. The plus is that if you've got press-worthy talent, that's, you know, press-worthy meaning the press will actually be interested in talking to them, then that's another angle that you can use to get some attention at the festival. But if your talent is not press-worthy, which is probably true of the vast majority of the people in the room, then it's probably going to be a real time suck and a real money suck to be surrounded by too many of them at any film festival in the world, because they depend on you to take care of them. It's, you know, to some, I mean, it's like you don't want an entourage, because it gets in the way of your being able to do what you need to accomplish at a festival.